Thank you very much for joining us this evening on the Northeast Organic Group webinar. Tonight we have been very kindly joined by our SRUC vet, Fiona, who is going to go through some tips for successful lambing and calving.
My name is Fiona. I'll introduce myself. I was a vet in mixed practice for 17 years, alarmingly, both in Caithness and Angus. And then I moved to SRUC in 2019, did a postgraduate qualification in sheep health and production, and I'm very much enjoying spending a lot of time thinking about sheep cattle, the diseases they have, how we can manage them a little bit better. This is the key when we're thinking about neonatal disease, and by neonatal disease, I mean the kind of disease in the first week of life, up to about the first 4 weeks of life. And when we think of that, the biggest thing that challenges our calves and lambs is our disease challenge from the environment. So bacteria, parasites, these sorts of things in the environment. And the thing that protects them from that disease is colostrum for the most part. They're born potentially without a very effective immune system, and that a specific protection against all these things in the environment, all the bacteria, viruses, and challenges in the environment comes from the colostrum. And I'm sure you'll know this, but I'm going to run through it very quickly. There's little holes in the guts that allow the immunoglobulins from the dam's colostrum, the sheep or cow's colostrum, to get into the guts and into the bloodstream of the calf and lamb, where they sit there protectively until that calf and lamb gets their own immune system up and running. So it's really important. These holes in the guts close, and they start to close around 2 hours after birth, really start closing kind of 6+ hours. And by 24 hours, the bar is shut. There's no more getting in there. So it's incredibly important that we get good quality colostrum into calves and lambs. We get enough of it in, and we do that really quickly while they're at the peak ability to absorb that, and so we get the most out of the colostrum we're producing. So kind of twofold how we're going to attack this. One is getting enough colostrum in there, and also thinking about the quality of the colostrum that we are getting our lambs and calves from their dams. So on the colostrum side, things that can affect things like dam body condition, dam nutrition, dam health. And there's certainly some genetics in there in the maternal traits that we want to select for animals with good colostrum. And the other side, from the lamb size, the vigor, again, that can be genetic. We can select for lamb vigor. Lamb size, can make them too big, or calf size too big, too much of a squeeze, a bit sore, and they don't get up and suck. And sometimes multiple births, just especially when we're thinking about twins in cattle and triplets to quads in sheep, there's just more demand on the dam to grow those animals and less resource to go to the that sits on the colostrum side. On the cleanliness environment side, we want a clean environment, but there's a degree of what's in our control, because especially if we're lambing and calving outside, we can be fortunate to the weather. But even inside, we can think about our stocking rates and our bedding cleanliness. Even this type of bedding can affect the degree of challenge that we give to our lambs and calves. Whether we're cleaning out and just disinfecting, how we're doing that, the amount of organic material, because organic material will deactivate most disinfectants. So we can't just slosh some disinfectant around it and expect a miracle. We need to have something that's relatively clean beforehand before we can. And also the diseases present on the farm, and the degree to which they are, the level of challenge, the amount of that these young stock will come. So that's our little balance. We want to weigh us down on the colostrum, and the more colostrum you can get into an animal, the more challenge from the environment they can withstand. So if you've got a tippy top, very, very full calf lamb it'll cope with a little bit more bad weather. It'll cope with a little bit more disease challenge. It'll cope with that increased challenge much better than one that hasn't got colostrum. And that's why we see kind of some calves and lambs getting disease, some calves and lambs in the same environment don't. So I hope that kind of makes sense now that I've summarized that. So, what are the biggest disease risks? I'm going to touch on this and then move away, and I can dig back down if there's demand to dig into any of these in a little bit more detail. We could definitely do that a little bit later. But thinking about our calves, I looked at some data for the whole of Scotland. What are the top three causes of or, calf death? E. coli septicemia, which is kind of tied in with kind of the navel L joint L complex, but that's kind of an infection's getting in the navel, setting up shop, either within the joints, within the navel itself, or spreading throughout the calf, and also calf scar. So most commonly, Cryptosporidia, rotavirus, and coronaviruses are top three within Scotland. But individually, farm to farm, that will vary. But big picture, that's what's going to kill the most of calves in Scotland. And then if they look at lambs, there's like E. coli crops up again. It's common to both calves and lambs. So E. coli, we call that watery mouth, but that is an E. coli septicemia in itself. Clostridial disease, much more common in lambs than calves. So we see lamb dysentery a little bit, especially Perthshire way, a little bit in Aberdeenshire, and then down in the borders. And pulpy kidney in an unvaccinated flocks can jump up and really cause some significant levels of problem in neonatal lambs. We think of it a growing lamb problem. Neonatal lambs, it can come in serious. And the hypothermia starvation, if we're thinking about just dead lambs, that's reasonably common when they're just for a variety, mismothering reasons, not enough milk, bad weather. But the key to preventing the vast majority, if not all of those, is colostrum. So we're going to have a little think about colostrum for a wee while. And as I've already touched on, really calves that get left colostrum. So these statements are taken from scientific papers that have looked into it. So they suffer from fewer neonatal illnesses, like I've just outlined. They're less likely to die from those diseases, and also have a much better daily life weight gains, which is definitely what we want our lambs, calves to be doing. We want to hit the ground, start growing, and not be bothered by any illnesses. And lambs, again, which get enough colostrum, fewer neonatal diseases again, and are much more likely to survive. And almost all neonatal, there's been some studies looked into almost all neonatal deaths in parent lambs which have not had enough colostrum. So colostrum is absolutely key. And if you want to focus on one thing to having more calves and lambs around to sell at the end of the year, colostrum is a big part of that. And we want to get enough colostrum reasonably soon after birth. That's going to give you your healthy, well-growing calves and lambs. So this was a nice little study done in 2022 on some Welsh farms. So probably not totally dissimilar to the situation that there's going to be on our Scottish farms. And this was looking at the percentage of ewes in the flock that had good quality colostrum. And that was defined as a Brix reading of 26.5% or bigger. Come back to Brix readings in there. You can see that kind of box plot. So you've got the coloured square was where most farms sit. There was an extreme farm that was up at 100%, which is fantastic. But those little dots down the bottom show the danger zone, the real proper danger zone. There was a farm with only 20% of sheep with sufficient colostrum, one with 10%, and one with none. Not one sheep on that farm had good enough quality colostrum. And the study didn't say, I would imagine that farm's got a really high neonatal death rate. We'll have problems with just all your neonatal diseases, watery mouth, starvation, and real just problems, joint ill probably as well. So some serious problems there. When I read this study, I have to say I'm a farmer's daughter, and we had a few hundred sheep around when I was young. This is the bit that stuck with me. So it was thick, sticky, or white coloured colostrum is more likely to be poor quality. And I don't know about anybody else, but when he had a sheep and had that really thick stuff, you could barely get out the teat. I remember going, oh, that's good stuff, isn't it? Turns out not so much. Um, Not just because the lambs or calves will struggle. We're talking about lambs, but the lambs would struggle to get it out of the teat. Actually, it tends to be a higher risk of being poor colostrum. So if that's a theme throughout a lot of your sheep that you've got sticky colostrum, then I think you should be, yeah, having a little look into it because it's maybe not as good stuff as I think we would probably all be led to believe. And so this study concluded the colostrum quality is much more likely to be poor in ewes that haven't had their needs met in late pregnancy. So we're going to come back to that, where there was a food protein in the silage when it was analysed of less than 120 grams per mass when ewes were in poor body condition. And interestingly, in single bearing ewes, you would have thought that would be that feels a little bit counterintuitive, or at least it certainly did with me initially. And then I thought about it. Nobody feeds their single bearing ewes, or not nobody, but if you scanned, you split them out, and you're scared of big lambs, and you don't want big lambs. So they don't get as much supplementation as your twin bearing ewes. The good news is that it doesn't seem to have a problem because these lambs, much as the colostrum quality is a little bit poorer, there's no competition from another lamb. And so they can get more. They tend to be bigger, stronger lambs, jump up, SRUC, and they tend to fill their bellies that little bit more. So as much as it's slightly poorer quality colostrum, they make up for it by drinking more of it. And so we don't see huge problems with colostrum, insufficient colostrum, or not as much as that wee statement might make you think just on first reading. So, how can we measure the colostrum intake? We can take a blood sample. It's probably much easier in calves than it is in lambs. So this is a different study. This is a suckler beef study done in 2020. We're looking at a large number of farms, looking at again, the percentage of calves with, this is the colostrum intake. So this is looking at the calf intake of colostrum, not the colostrum quality. So it's looking at something slightly different. But again, looking at how many calves on these farms had got enough colostrum. And that varied from at the one end of two farms with no calves that were sampled had enough colostrum, up to on the best farms, you're up about 60, 70%. The wee bars there just indicating some confidence intervals. So there's a way to go, I think, with suckler calves. Again, getting enough into them, getting good enough quality, getting the dam nutrition right, so they're not growing big calves, but you're getting enough colostrum quality. But there's certainly, even on the best farms, a little bit of improvement that we can make in getting enough colostrum and good enough quality colostrum into our calves. So yeah, I thought it was a really nice study. And most farms were doing okay. So how much do we need? Lambs, 60 to 200 mils within the first 24 hours. Sorry, that should say mils per kilo, depending on which study you look at. Generally, that's a pint and a half for a four kilo lamb, 800 mils for a lamb. So you want to get as much as you can in as quickly as you can with a total about 200 mils per kilo in that first 24 hours. And then a calf, ideally 4 litres within the first 2 hours, so 10% of the body weight, and then a similar quantity within the next 12 hours. And I'd say that feels like an awful lot to most of us, that 4 litres within the first 2 hours. But we were talking about the holes in the gut and them starting to close and decreased absorption as they go on from that. Certainly 6 hours was talked about for a long time, and that has been squeezed down. I think 2 hours would be a brilliant target. Not always doable. Totally appreciate that life isn't as straightforward as that. But I think that what happened with the 6 hours is people tended to wait the 6 hours and then go, oh, it hasn't sucked. So by the time you get the crush ready and the cow and the crush and the calf onto suck, it can be 7 and 8 hours until it's getting its first suck. So it's kind of squeezed down. And my top tip of this is the suckle reflex, 10-minute suckle reflex. If you've got a newborn calf, if you 10 minutes old, if you put your fingers in its mouth and it's got a strong suck, there's a good chance that that calf's going to get up and suck. Okay. If it's got a weak suckle reflex and it doesn't suck on your fingers, just get some colostrum into it. It's not going to manage to suckle on its own. It's a very high risk not getting up and not suckling. So that's that. 10-minute suckle reflex is a really good quick check. Are you okay, little calf? You're okay. We'll come and check you back later. You're not okay. Let's do something now. Let's get the cow in if she's quiet enough. We've kind of covered this already. So they talk about the 5 Qs. There's the speed at which you get it, the quickly, the quantity is how much you get in, the quality of the colostrum. The thing we also need to think about is how cleanly we do it. And there's been a lot of work, recent work done, especially on mostly dairies, but I think the same will stand true of on bee farms, is that the collection vessel, so whatever you're milking a cow into, if you're milking a cow, and your stomach tube, be that lamb stomach tube, cattle stomach tube, calf stomach tube, must be clean. They can be phenomenally dirty. They don't look too bad. They look to the eye clean. But if you take a swab and give them a swab and then take it to a lab and so say how dirty they are, filthy. And so instead of helping your lamb or calf by giving them a nice belly full of colostrum, what you actually do is you give them a belly full of colostrum and usually a vast quantity of E. coli. And that helps nothing. If you're giving them, you know, a significant whack of bacteria directly to their stomach. Um, and especially since these are more likely to be the compromised animals, it really does them no good at all. So really make sure it's clean, clean them with hot water, disinfect as often as you can, Milton or whatever disinfectant you want to use. But really do just a quick rinse from a cold tap and hung up on the wall is not enough. And I know you're busy and I know it's difficult. But you're giving this colostrum to better these calves and give them a good start. Don't undo all your good work and your hard work and having to milk a suckler cow by then using a dirty administration. So I talked about bricks and refractometers. This is how to measure the colostrum quality as it comes out of a sheep or a cow. I don't know if any of you got Brixes. You can give me a yes in the QA, just if you do, and if you're using them, and tell me your good news stories. If you're not, then I suggest you do, just to keep a little eye on things. They're about a tenner off Amazon. You can stretch to 20 quid for a good one. In cows, you want a scale that goes up to about 30. In sheep, it's worthwhile getting one that has a scale that goes up to 50. The bee people use them to measure honey. I don't know what they do. And sometimes when you're making jam, apparently, just oil mine until it looks like jam. Hope for the best. But people with more skill than me use them, so they're freely available on the internet. What you want to do, you want to calibrate it with some water, and there'll be instructions in the packet. Once you've happy that it's nice and calibrated, you put a little drop of colostrum onto the kind of base of it. You pop its little plasticky cap down, and you look through it. You need a little bit of daylight just to see through it, and there will be a line. You can see in that third image. That line will give you the bricks reading. So for cows, you want colostrum quality better than 22%, and sheep higher than 26%. Sheep quite commonly up at kind of 40 odd percent, but you want a minimum of 26. If you've got a lot of them down around the 26 or below the 26, then it's an indication that things haven't gone.
If you were doing that, Fiona, how Do you recommend just using it on a handful of yows, or just ones that you think have poor quality colostrum, or how would you work it?
I would I would be very aware of what I was measuring, if that makes sense. So you could just do the first 20 that lambed, or you could do the first 5 cows, or you could go, I'm not sure about you. Once you've got your eye in, I'm not sure about you, I'm going to check. So you could use it as a spot check. You could use it I'm going to test the first few that are coming through to check. And certainly if the calving's 9 weeks, 12 weeks long, you've got time to modify the ration slightly to improve things for your later calving cows. The same with lambing. You've got the opportunity, if you've got a big lambing in 2 lots, to modify the ration for your later lambing or your second lot of lambing use. So it's worth doing kind of just at the start, and then if you're worried. What I will say though, and it kind of ties into this next slide, so unless there's any other questions onwards, is colostrum supplements. Um, as much as they can be very good and they're better than nothing, even a poor quality colostrum tends to be much better than a colostrum supplement. So what I'm not saying is if you get poor quality colostrum, use a packet. Don't do that. Okay, if poor quality colostrum, just give more of it. The animal will need more of that colostrum to reach the same amount of immunity. So it feeds back into nutrition and feeds back into what we're doing nutritionally to try and improve the colostrum quality, but it doesn't mean grab a packet. So this is a study done in 2020. I've taken all the names of the colostrum off the bottom. You can go and find the study if you want to dig into that. But my little red line there at 3 grams of IgG per feed, so this is per serving of colostrum, represents 10% of the required amount of IgG for a lamb. So we can see that very few colostrum supplements are providing even 10% what is really required. So they have other things. They give energy. They can bring a lamb or calf back from the absolute brink. They can be useful and they have their place, but they are not as good as what you're going to get out of your ewes and your cows. So first choice is always using something from either the dam, or if you've managed to milk off excess from another animal. If you've got a Johne's problem in cattle, keep a record of that just in case. Yeah, colostrum supplements absolutely have their place, but just be aware that they are far inferior to colostrum.
Is there sorry, Fiona, is there any research been done into cattle supplements for colostrum as well?
I'm not independent, so a lot of the companies will do their own research and publish their own data, but that was an independent study and hasn't been. If there was one in Calvin, absolutely would have shared it, but unfortunately there's not. I think it gives the message that A, they vary massively, and B, they're just not as good as. There'll be the occasional person that wants to be really, really on it and really, really diligent, and they give a packet of colostrum to every calf as soon as it hits the ground just to keep it going, not really realizing the difference in quality and the fact that that's maybe a litre of good quality colostrum. It's then not going to suckle because it's been filled up. And so we see a good number of packet colostrum calves through our post-mortem room, which tells a little bit of the story. So yeah, what we're really trying to do when we think about colostrum is to tip those scales in the way of the calf or the lamb so that it is more resilient to I'll toddle through. Any questions on that before I hop on to think about a little bit of nutrition? Because obviously nutrition plays into our quality as well. Nothing. Nobody can type quickly enough. I'll keep a little eye on it just in case. So, someone pointed out that there was a little bit of an issue with our silage, and I think colleagues at SRUC, Shaw has been compiling data and sharing it around. And this is the 20 this is the silage that we're feeding just now. Analysis of over 100,000 different silages that were have been received. And what we can see, if my red line is where we want it to be, is that there's an awful lot of really quite low energy silages around. So about 2/3 of it were under that magic 10.5 number. Big bale silage tends to be a little bit worse than the pit silage. So yeah, it's certainly a concern, and it is certainly that energy is likely to be the most limiting part of your rations, your winter rations, and your rations for your sheep and your cattle coming into lambing and calving. The good news with the dry matters are reasonably okay, so we don't maybe need to feed as much if we're just going by kind of iron by volume, but the dry matters were a little bit better. And the good news is the proteins were actually okay. They were slightly higher than usual, and there's nothing too disastrous. Equally, a lot of variation, a lot of very good ones, but also some pretty poor ones. So always worth getting your forage analysed, because it's not something you can do by eye or assess by eye at all as to whether that is, yeah, your quality you don't know. But assuming you've got a reasonable protein, energy is going to be your most limiting factor in most of the rations this year. So hopefully everybody has done that, has looked at that and has balanced a ration. So thinking just a little bit about sheep, these are your colostrum quality. We've kind of covered this as most likely to be poor. Added on here, we think about access quite a lot of the time. We don't think enough about access to concentrates and enough feed access to your forage. So make sure that there's enough feed space for your sheep. So you want, when you're feeding concentrates, for there to be 45 centimeters per ewe. You're feeding ad lib forage, that needs to be 15 centimeters per ewe. And that quite often doesn't happen, and that can be limiting. I think we've kind of covered this one way or another elsewhere. Energy wise, if we get poor quality forage, your intakes are going to be lower, and you're not going to manage to reach the energy requirements. These fetuses, as they're growing, take up more volume, and then there's less room. A sheep is only so big, much as she can expand reasonably well during pregnancy. She's only so big, and as the fetuses get their kind of full size, there's less room to get some food in. And a general rule of thumb, if energy in a forage is less than 11 joules per kilogram dry mass, your multiple ewes will need a little bit of supplementation with something that has a little bit of energy. But as you're doing that, just be careful to avoid ruminal acidosis when you're giving your concentrates. You don't want anything more than half a kilo per feed. If you need to give them more than that, split it into 2 feeds. It's close to 12 hours apart. Oh, look, there's my space requirements. I didn't have to remember them. That's just the reason is that your concentrate is going to dip your rumen pH, and the rumen becomes less efficient when it's down at lower pHs. And if you can do it as a TMR, obviously there's not the big swings of a concentrate feed. But if you're feeding large amounts of concentrate, you can really swing that rumen into inefficiency. And in trying to be good to your sheep and give them more concentrate, can't make best use of that because the rumen becomes less efficient because the pH is swinging around. So if you can do a TMR, brilliant. But failing that, 2 feeds is better than 1 if it's at all possible with it. And how do we know whether we've got the ration right? We can ask the sheep. We can absolutely ask the sheep. I don't know whether many of you do this, but I strongly recommend you do. You go to the sheep and you take blood samples from 10 animals. The cost is remarkably cheap, even if I do say so myself. But the lab fees are, I don't know how we sell it for this price, but we do. So take advantage of what we do. We want to do it 3 to 4 weeks before lambing, so we've got enough time to identify problems and change the ration prior to lambing. And you probably want to get your typical animals, ideally from your twin and triplet groups. You can, if you don't know, just pick 10 at random. You want to take a sample of typical ones. You don't want to pick out the worst or pick out. You're looking for the average of these groups. And if you are feeding concentrate, just make sure you keep away for 4 hours away from the concentrate feed when you book your vet in to come out and do this. And then we can look at both BOHB and urea, and that'll give us an indication as to whether you're feeding enough energy and feeding enough protein to meet the demands of late pregnancy. So it's a brilliant way of asking the sheep. You've done the silage analysis or forage analysis. You may well have calculated your ration, but what the sheep are actually eating may differ significantly. That might be because of if you need a bit of a coarse silage, some sheep will be picking out the best bits, and the long straggly stuff gets left for the more submissive sheep, and they're eating a different ration to what we would think on paper. If it's not a very even silage, it might be there's not enough feed space. Your dominant ewes are getting their fill, but your submissive ewes are not getting their fill, or their younger ewes are not. So yeah, there's a bit of creative variation there, and it's a brilliant way of asking the sheep what they think of their ration. We can also look at albumin. If your sheep are a little bit thin, we can have a little look at the albumin as well. That gives us a bit more a long-term protein status. So when I think about our cattle, body condition score is obviously really important. It's important in sheep too. I just didn't slide for that. We don't want them too fat because they are at risk for calving problems. We don't want them too thin because of the weak calves and poor colostrum. Totally exactly the same in sheep. Don't want them too fat. Don't want them too Goldilocks and her porridge. You want her just right. And cows, you want them to be dry for at least 5 weeks, weaned for 5 weeks prior to calving, just to get the colostrum going. And we think about feeding suckler cows, an ad lib silage diet does risk them becoming a bit too fat. Now, if you've housed them and they're a wee bit thin, that's not a problem, because you've got that little window of getting some condition on them before they calve. So it might be that you want to strategically feed them an all silage diet, especially if they're a little bit, if they've had a hard summer for whatever reason. And we can use that kind of pre-calving well in advance of calving. Kind of don't want to be doing it within 4 weeks of calving, but well in advance of calving. You can use the diet just to adjust their body condition to where you want it to be. If we don't want them to eat all of the silage because they're absolutely perfect as they are just now, we can add in some straw or some poor quality hay just to provide a bit of room and fill and effectively dilute it. You're looking for about a 9% crude protein ration most of the time, increasing to 12% just as you come into the calving and then into lactation. And you want that ration to be stable for in that 4 to 6 week period prior to calving, in that 12% zone prior to calving, so you get good quality colostrum. It's not a problem this year, but if we have low dry matter, we can have issues with volume. The dry matter of the silage or the forage has a big impact on the volume that an animal has to eat to meet their demand. Can we ask cows? We can ask cows about their ration as well. We're not nearly as generous with the cow testing, just because the tests we do are a little bit more expensive and a little bit different. It can be around £30 per animal, depending on what we're going to ask, questions we're going to ask. You want it to do this blood sampling at least 2 or 3 weeks after they're on that stable ration either after housing or pre-calving, depending if you're going to switch or change it. And ideally a month before calving, again, just so that we can change it and tweak it in time for the start of calving. Typical animals, and remember about concentrate feed. Things that we can look at, we can look at the BHB and NEFA, that those two bits look at the energy. We can use NEFAs in cattle. NEFAs in sheep we can absolutely do, but they're always massively high and they're just a waste of money. So don't worry about NEFAs in sheep. We can use them in cattle because they're a wee bit more sensitive there. The urea, again, looking at the protein side of things. And magnesium, really, really important. About two-thirds of suckler cows are deficient in magnesium. There's not enough magnesium, you're going to get slow calvings. Slow calvings mean those dull calves that don't get up and suck. They can cause serious problems. You can end up calving more cows that can retain more placentas, and the calves just aren't quite as thrivey as you want them to be. So we definitely want to be checking magnesiums because it is a significant problem. Guys, even when there's buckets available, even when we're feeding minerals, that's still a risk. So this is my suckler case study. This was the back end of last year. This one happened. It was a 160 cow herd with half of them calving in the spring, half in autumn. So he was about halfway through his autumn calving. Arrived at our door, which generally means he was having problems and was having some deaths. And he mentioned these calves were really dull and slow to get going. He was having, never usually has problems, but was having not only problems with slow, dull calves, he was having problems with scour and pneumonia in his 3-week-old calf as well. And just a little bit despairing because it was not something he was used to having at all. And he told me a story that they were out at grass. Grass was a wee bit tight back end of last year. There wasn't just an awful lot of it around. So he was bringing them inside 2 to 3 weeks before calving. He popped them on a diet of hay and some undersown straw. And they did have access to the pre-calving and high meds. So there was a few things that rang my alarm bells and made me say, I think you should get your vet out and do some bloods in some cows in fairly quick smart. One was the fact he's got a diet change in 2 to 3 weeks before calving. So he's seeing them kind of look like they want going to start calving at grass, scooping them up, putting them inside. You've got a diet change fairly close to calving. Now, rumens are like tankers. They don't turn quickly. So they need time if you're changing the diet to adjust to that new diet. So a change that close to calving was definitely a concern. And then he's putting them on hay. And hay is unlikely for a cow in late pregnancy to meet either the energy or the protein needs. So yeah, so there's those sorts of things. And then on the other side of things, he's got neonatal disease. That says to me there's not either not enough colostrum or it's not good enough quality, which says there's probably a nutrition. So I sent him home to phone the vets because they were going to wait to see the outcome of my lab results. And I think we're going to find nothing here. So his one stillborn calf, we found no infectious cause of stillbirth. We did all of the testing. We made sure that there wasn't any infectious disease and there was nothing. But his bloods were concerning. We had a little look at the BOHB, so that's looking at the energy, and the NEFA looking at the energy in the diet. And there's certainly some scope to be a little bit concerned there. Some high NEFAs and some BHBs that were a little bit raised above reference range from where they want to be. And we can see, not unexpectedly, the ureas were low. There was definitely not enough protein going around. Magnesium, there was one cow that didn't like the magnesium lick one little jot and was refusing to eat it, and by the looks of things, and had a low magnesium, had a low albumin just by chance. But so yes, so there was definitely indications there he wasn't meeting either the protein or the energy needs of those cows in late pregnancy. So our conclusion was that his dull cows were probably due to those slow calvings because of a magnesium deficiency, and also because of the protein and energy problems. If there's not enough protein and energy around, you also can put yourself at risk of slow calvings. And then this scour pneumonia was probably due to the poor colostrum intake because they were coming out dull, or quality because of diet. So yeah, so that kind of explained what was going on. Actually, it didn't kind of, it very much explained what was going on that farm. And yeah, it just shows you when you try and do a good thing. He thought he was being really good. Cows inside, somewhere nice shelters here have lots of hay. He thought he was looking after his animals, but unfortunately ended up just doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, causing quite significant problems for himself. But yeah, if you're seeing neonatal disease, absolutely got to start to wonder about colostrum intakes. So this is a sheep case. This was last spring. It was a 250 predominant mule flock. They were March lambing. They had some massive lambs the year before, so they were very wary about feeding their sheep at all. So bear in mind this is March lambing, and it was kind of Aberdeenshire-ish, Banffshire-ish. So the single bearing ewes were just getting some grass. The twin bearing ewes were in grass with an access to a lick block and some treacle. And then the triplets got a small amount of concentrate and some access to some turnips. And what was happening with them? They were having stillbirths and weekly lambs. So certainly stuff you would think about being infectious and think about being abortion and be worrying about something, some disease going through them. They did report some of the lambs had a tremor and were unstable on their feet. And there was just nothing they could do to make these lambs live. It didn't matter if you put them in the hot box, put supplementary milk, gave them a glucose injection, gave them any range of treatment whatsoever, just nothing was working. And they were running at about a 25 to 30% lamb loss rate, which was stonking. It was an absolute, I don't know how they got up in the morning, a stonking lamb. We looked into it, all breeds, all ages, from various different sources. All the groups were affected, but it was most often the twin bearing ewes. So they had no end of dead animals, so they popped a good number of them into us. Lots of investigation. We didn't find any infectious cause of the stillbirths. And then these dead 3 to 4 day old lambs, we saw strong evidence of poor colostrum intake and no infectious cause of death. Vet, whilst we were doing that, went out and did some bloods. And we can see the twins are in the kind of blue bit at the top. We can see some absolutely massively high BOHBs. So for reference, anything over 3 puts them at risk of clinical twin lamb disease. So they were absolutely stonking, severe energy deficiency in the twin group. Remarkably, the ureas, the proteins looked okay. So I think there was probably enough protein in the grass, but just not enough energy. And they were severely energy deficient. In the triplet group, not as severe, but still evidence of energy deficient diet. And that was what we thought was going on. So we've got a severely energy deficient diet. The triplets were less severely affected because they were being fed supplementary feed. But yeah, a March grass only lambing in our neck of the woods is pretty optimistic. You know, if we think just now they would be more than halfway through lambing, there's no grass. There's just no grass. There's not enough grass around and to properly manage to meet the demands of late pregnancy and early lactation. The stillbirths we just put down to the deficiency in the dams, and the death at 3 to 4 days old just due to the poor colostrum intakes and the lack of milk production. Interestingly, these nervous signs in the lambs, we might have a little, given this year, we might have a little panic about blue tongue when we're getting nervous disease in lambs, but you can get brain damage associated with energy deficiency in the ewe. So there was little enough energy going around in those ewes that it actually damaged the brains of the unborn fetuses